Hello all, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, based on wherever you are. So just a PSA before starting this. If you are attending Directions Asia, I'll be there. Let's connect if you're there. Let's talk about things that are changing. I would love to hear from your perspective about Business Central, what's changing. So if you're there, just ping me on my email or any social media account and we'll surely get connected. I'm doing a little bit stuff on AI and I'll try to record something before I come to Directions Asia. But even then, if it is not there, let's connect and let's try to explore this new world of Business Central with AI and its capabilities around it if you are in Directions Asia. So let's get started with this. Today we'll be talking about how you set up Nav username password credential in 2024 release wave 1. Nothing new on this. We have done it in the past, but there was a comment in one of the video and that's why we are recording this. So if you have either seen the previous video or if you know how to do this, then I'll see you in another video. Otherwise, let's get into it. Okay. So I have a Business Central environment configured and let's open it, which by default is configured with the Windows credential. So if I try to access my Business Central 2024 or 24 release wave 1, this opens up with my Windows credential that are set up on this machine. So the first thing that we'll need to set up Nav username password is a account which have its username and a password, right? So let's get ahead and let's go into the users page and let's try to set it up. Okay, there's an administrator account. Let me try to add a new account, and this time I'll need to name it something. So let's name it as sort of. The full name is my name, and this is the full user. The next thing, because it's not a Windows authentication, it is not ACS authentication, I'll have to set up a password for this user. Now once you set up the password, there are some rules that need to keep in mind. So let's try to see what are those rules. If I try to just use 123, I will get an error message that the password you enter does not meet the minimum criteria. And the minimum criteria is it should be 8 character long, contain at least one uppercase, one lowercase, and one number, and one special character, and it must not have a sequence of 3 or more ascending or descending repeating characters. It's a long list, so let me just paste it in Notepad so that we can try to mimic a password. Okay, here's the minimum requirement. Let's try to see what we can do. We need uppercase, we need a lowercase. Okay, what else we need? One number, and I'll just use some random numbers. So this makes it into 5 characters till now, and one special character, and this should not be a sequence. So this makes it 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, exactly 8 character. Okay, so I'll save it here because I might be creating other users and we will try with those users. So let's try to use this password over here and over here. Okay, this seems to be accepting it, so we're done with it. So the first thing that we have done is we have set up an account with username and a password assigned to it. Is this the only way? No, there are other ways. Let's try to figure that out. So if you have to do it in bulk, I would rather suggest you to do it from PowerShell ISE or administration cell. I'll kind of like PowerShell ISE, so I'll use it. I'll do the module import for Business Central 24, and once the module get installed, what I'll do is I can use this panel on the right to search for commands. What I'm trying to do is trying to create a new user, so you do it with new nav server user, and then here you get different options. I'm not creating Windows app ID SID, I'm creating a username. The service instance that I'll be want this user is BC240. Username is, let's say, Gaurav, and um, full name is, let's say, Gaurav Dhani. This, I don't know someone as Gaurav Dhani, but just using that name. I need to give a password, but the problem here is that I cannot give a plain text because password is supposed to be encrypted. And let me show you what I mean. If I try to give this as password here and try to run this, I'll get an error message that you cannot bind this with a string. You need to do it with a secure string because you are typing a password. So how do you kind of ask user for a secure string? Is you do something like as read post, which will allow user to see a prompt. The prompt title would be enter password or whatever you want, and then hyphen as secure string. What will happen with this? As soon as I try to run this, it'll pop up a window where I can insert the new to Business Central tenant environment. Okay. Hopefully this is correct. Okay, let's do this. So I'm trying to run this now. The name of the user in this case would be Gaurav, and I would like to assign a password to it. What you see here is that I'm getting a window. I'll use the same password for the demo, and I can enter the password here, which then will convert automatically to a secure string, and that user is also should be visible here when I get into the users page. So yeah, now you know the two ways how you can add users into Business Central environment on-prem. Okay. So what happens now? If I try to log in, will I get a username password prompt? Let's see. Okay, let's browse it. So when I'm trying to access it, it does directly logged in with my Windows credential because our service that is configured to this particular environment is still pointing to authentication type as Windows. Now, in the latest version of Business Central, you don't have an administration panel. So in the previous version, you can see that there is a credential type which have these options. Currently, in my BC240 service, it's also defaulting to Windows, and I'll have to change it to NavUserPassword. So how I do that? Okay, let's go to the path where my Business Central service is. Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central 240 service. Okay, in here, if you are pointing to the default instance, you get a file here called customsetting.config. Here, if you are pointing to an instance which is separately created, then you look for a folder called instances. If it is here, it's not yet created. It'll get created when you create an instance, and then your file will be pointed inside that particular folder. But here's my file that has all my configuration. Let's open this file and with H. Okay. Here it's a HTML file with the key and the value. So now you'll notice that it is pointing to a server. There's no instance. That is the database name. And in the same way, somewhere down here, you will find that the credential type for this service is set to Windows. So let's see. Let me search for it. Okay. Here. Oh, this is default client. Here. Is it it? Let's see. This is no, this is not. This is something else. Here it is. Client service credential type, which is set as Windows, and then just above this you see a little bit of documentation about this key, which is this. This is the type of client credential for authentication. Possible values are Windows, which is set to be default, then username, ACS, and nav username password. So what we are going to do, we are going to change this property, this one, to from Windows to pointing to ACH. Now, what if I have to see the value of this property currently? So let's go back to PowerShell and let's search for get nav server instance or something like that. Get nav server instance or configuration, nav server configuration. Server instance is BC240. If I just do run, it'll show me the whole service file here if needed. If I know what I'm looking for, then I can specify the key name, which is client service credential type. It'll tell me what is the value of that which is set to Windows. So that's how you can check a specific key value in your service. Now, if you have to set the parameter, then you use the set nav server configuration. And in here, you need to define the key, the service name, and the key value. So my key value is NavUserPassword. Okay. So now let's copy this and I'll save it for you guys if needed. This is changing client service credential type, and I'll put all this into my GitHub. If you need these commands, you'll be able to get it from there. Okay, so we run this command so that the configuration file changes where the PowerShell is making changes, and it's telling me that I need to restart the service because I'm making some changes. Okay, so let's do a restart of nav server instance with server instance BC240. Now this will restart the service, but while it is restarting, if I refresh this file, let me copy this, let this get lost. If I reset this file, what you'll notice that the changes are already done and it is pointing to credential type as NavUserPassword. Okay, so now if I see here, it's kind of getting loaded. But while this is happening and this is done, we did add user, one from Business Central and one from PowerShell, which is this. But we did not set the permissions for these users, which is important because even if a user is added and if there are no permissions, I'll not be able to log into that environment. So now let's do a nav server user. And then there is one more called new nav server user permission set. When we need to give the permission set ID, let's say I'll make it as super, and it is not the Windows account. So let's go in here. The server instance is BC240 and the username, let's try it with Gaurav, and let's run this. If you want to limit someone to a specific company, then you specify the company name. I'm making that change so that this user Gaurav gets access to the environment. So we have created user, we have given the permission to that user, and now we have also changed the configuration on the service tier. So hopefully I should be able to log in to my Business Central environment. So let's see. Okay, so I'm here and it says you do not have access to Business Central. Verify that you has been set up. Okay, that does not make any sense. Something is not working. Now let's understand this. Your service file is used for connecting your database to your kind of a service is mapped to a database. Any transaction that happened to your SQL database goes via service. But then in Business Central, there is a client piece, which is hosted on your IIS. Now this IIS is somehow connected to the server instance. And how that happens, if you go and do an explore, you will be routed to your C drive inetpub www root BC40, 240 in this case, and it can be different, this name, on your environment. In this particular environment, there are different kind of files. What we are interested is file of type JSON. So this whole client that you are accessing on the browser gets connected to the service using a file called, I don't know why it's being removed, navsettings.json. Now this navsettings.json is actually connecting my web client to my service tier, and in here also there is a property called client service credential type, which is currently set to Windows. So if you look at this file very closely, it tells you that it is going to connect to a server, which server, where the services are being installed, and then it is pointing to a service which is BC240, and then whatever database is mapped to 240, it will kind of fetch the data from there to show it to users. And to interact between service and web client, there is also a property called client service credential type. So what we do now, we also have to change the value of this property to be NavUserPassword. How we do that? Let's go ahead and let's try to do a change client web service credential type. So like we had set nav server configuration, in the same way we'll have a set nav web server instance configuration. Now this is specifically to modify this nav settings.json. You need to again specify the key name. So my key name becomes client service credential type. The key value that I would like to assign is NavUserPassword. The web server instance that I'm pointing to is BC240, whatever the folder name that you had. And I can just copy this so that I can place it for you here and then run this. Now, as soon as I run this, you will notice as I refresh this, this property at 53 line number will change itself to NavUserPassword. Okay, now that looks good. Let's try to access it. Are we done with everything that need to happen? Yes. Now it's asking me for login credentials. Not everything is done. So let's have a look. I try to give the username and I also try to give the password. When I try to do that and try to sign in to my Business Central environment, hopefully this should allow me to get into the environment, and it's just trying to take me inside environment, but it said it cannot open the company because there are no companies in the database, which is not true because we saw that there were companies. So remember, while we were adding permission, we only added it for user Gaurav, not for user Saurav. So if you don't have permission, you see these kind of errors. But if I try to log in with the other user where I have already assigned a super permission set, that user will then be able to log into the environment and will have access to the resources that has been published. Now, the first thing that I should do as a good administrator is go to users, make sure that the Saurav user also get some permission that are needed based on whatever my role is. For the time being, I'll set it to super, which means it have more or less every right in the Business Central environment. I'm not going to limit it to company because I want it to be on every company. So what we have done is you can, and I've, I guess, explained you both ways. We need to import the model, okay, for Business Central 24 at this moment, which happens with the command that you're seeing on your screen right now. Then you need to add users of type username and password in your environment. You can either do it from PowerShell. If it's a bulk set of users, 5-10 users, then you should be doing it from PowerShell rather than doing it on the client. But as we saw, you are able to do it from the client if needed. Once that is done, now I need to allow my service to have certain kind of authentication allowed when somebody is trying to connect to the environment. That we did with the set nav server configuration, where we change the client service credential type to be NavUserPassword. The last piece of the equation is our IIS hosted website, which eventually becomes your client that users use. You also have to change the client service credential type property in your web server config, which happens with this PowerShell command, where you specify the minimum set of properties. So in summary, what we have to do, three things. Define the users with their passwords and the right permission. Second, configure the server instance to use nav username password. Third, configure the nav setting.json file in your web server instance. For the configuration file, one tip: never ever try to change those files manually. They are supposed to be updated via PowerShell only. Can you do it? You can give it a try. But if something goes bad while you're changing that file, and even after saving, it's something that you can't roll back to. You'll have to repair the installation, or in some cases, you might have to reinstall. So do it wisely and do things from PowerShell if needed with the commands that are here. These commands will be available in the GitHub repo, where you can just take these commands, change your parameters, database name, service name and all, and you'll be able to configure the nav username password into your environment. When we use the client option to add users, if you have one or two users. If you have more users of this type which you need to add to your environment, then use PowerShell to add users and add the respective permissions. Okay, so hopefully I was able to explain how to do it for the people who wanted it into the comment section. I'll leave it to your judgment. Is this kind of content that you like? If yes, please hit the like button. If you dislike it, please do hit the dislike button. I'm okay with it. If you think this is something that your friend or colleague or some other people in the community will be helpful for them, then share this video. I would highly encourage you to share this to one person that you know whom this video will help. And then do subscribe to the channel if you haven't, which I doubt that you haven't yet. I know you guys, you will do it for me. Okay, so before I let you go, again, that reminder that if you're coming to Directions Asia this year, I'll see you there, and let's talk about something that are changing in the business and ecosystem. I would love to hear your feedback about everything, including this YouTube channel. So I'll see you sooner than later. Till then, keep learning and do keep sharing. Remember, I told you, please share it to one person whose work will have a positive impact while watching this video. Thank you. Have a great day.